Do you think you might be in a dark night of the soul? Are you looking for information about the dark night of the soul, but not finding something that explains your exact experience? Now, one reason for this is that there's two types of dark night of the soul, and they happen at different times in the spiritual awakening journey. I'm Sophia Persephone, and in this video I'm going to explain the two different types of dark night of the soul and how to tell which one you're going through. So the two types of dark night of the soul are, number one, the growth-oriented dark night, and number two, the spiritual dark night. Both are connected to the spiritual awakening journey, but the growth-oriented dark nights happen very early on before our conscious awakening or epiphany, and the spiritual dark night happens much later in the journey when we're already aware that we're going through the spiritual awakening process. I'm going to talk about the growth-oriented dark night of the soul first. So this is the kind of dark night that you're going to hear talked about in most videos about the dark night of the soul. It's possible to go through multiple episodes of this, and it can manifest in different ways for different people depending on circumstances and the changes that are required in your life. It's growth-oriented. Its purpose is to help you grow as an individual and to review the situations in your life which aren't giving you what you need. Now, the mechanics behind this dark night of the soul are important to understand. It's 100% connected to chakra health. If we're not living our optimal life, if we're not being authentic to ourselves, if we're behaving badly or we're allowing others to behave badly towards us, it impacts the flow of energy through our chakras. Now, which ones depends on the specifics of the situation. So let's say, for example, you keep repeating the pattern of getting into damaging relationships. Let's say that you're drawn to narcissists or you're drawn to violent partners. That's going to impact some chakras more than others. For example, it's going to impact your solar plexus chakra, which is where your sense of self and your sense of confidence come from. It's probably going to affect the throat chakra if we're scared of speaking up for ourselves. And it could also affect the root chakra, which is our sense of security. In this example, we're going to experience symptoms related to those energy centers, and these can be emotional and mental as well as physical and environmental. That's why this type of dark night of the soul can manifest in an infinite variety of ways. It really depends on the individual and their circumstances, and that's why you might be finding it difficult to find a description of the dark night of the soul that you're going through. It's unique to you if it's growth-oriented. There is a common symptom, however, and that's a feeling of depression. The reason for that is if any chakra's energy flow is reduced to below 50% of its capacity, this is where symptoms of depression start to show. That's when you can be said to have entered a dark night of the soul. The more chakras you have with less than 50% flow, the more severe the symptoms become. Now, it seems strange, but this is the universe trying to help you. What it does is it makes your circumstances and state of mind become so unbearably miserable that you're forced to look for solutions. And if you've ever been in this type of dark night of the soul, I'm sure you've had that moment where you've thought, I can't do this anymore. That's your breakthrough moment. That's the point at which you're going to start taking action. You're growing. Some people, this growth might mean starting to tackle deep-rooted psychological conditions. For others, it might mean leaving relationships or careers. For some, it might be about overcoming addiction, or it could be a combination of all of these things or something else entirely. You know, the growth-oriented dark night of the soul really does come in many different flavors. So how do you know if you're in this type of dark night? Well, firstly, you're unlikely to have started your conscious spiritual awakening journey. So if you haven't had your epiphany yet, but you're fairly sure you're in a dark night of the soul, it is growth-oriented. Secondly, you should be able to trace your depression back to a specific cause, either internal or external or a mix of the two. There should be great big signposts from the universe pointing to the thing that you need to work on. And thirdly, you may have been around this loop several times. Often it can take a while for us to find the solution to the problem, and often it can take us a while to identify the problem in the first place. So now I'm going to tell you why you should embrace the growth-oriented dark night of the soul and even be thankful for it. It's helping you transform yourself and your circumstances. It's forcing you to take action and it's leading you to a better future. And not only that, but a growth-oriented dark night of the soul can build the platform for conscious spiritual awakening. We literally cannot consciously awaken unless we've built a stable mental and emotional platform. And having a growth-oriented dark night of the soul can actually be a sign that we're in the first stage of spiritual awakening, called resolution. We resolve the issues that are preventing us from moving forward spiritually. Now, during a growth-oriented dark night of the soul, we often start to question the meaning of existence, and that's important because it can lead us to research metaphysical and spiritual topics. It starts to open the doors of the mind. Instead of just accepting, we start to question. And we might also start to learn spiritual techniques like mindfulness or meditation and yoga. Because during a growth-oriented dark night, we find these protocols because we want to manage our symptoms. But in fact, they're also helping us to integrate with our higher selves without us being consciously aware. And that is the start of spiritual awakening. So you're starting to build that stable mental and emotional platform. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the spiritual dark night of the soul. This happens right after a stage of awakening called connection. And at this point, we're aware that we're waking up. We know we're in an awakening process. Now, during connection, our chakras are opened to their fullest extent. We feel at one with the universe, we understand that everything is love, and we have otherworldly experiences. But when we reach 50% integration with our higher selves, remember that spiritual awakening is an integration process, we enter the dark night of the soul. It's the total opposite of connection. And again, it's linked to the chakras. What happens is the flow of energy through our system, now this time it's every single chakra all at once, is reduced. And sometimes it's reduced down to as low as 5% of energy flow. And that is the minimum required to sustain human life. Everything switches off, literally overnight, and it can be very disturbing. We start questioning everything that happened to us in the connection phase. Sometimes we wonder if we had a psychotic break. You didn't, it's fine. And also we can enter a period of something that feels very similar to grief because we're mourning the loss of this connection. So we can feel lonely, bereft, angry, and frustrated. And the other thing that we're going to find is that when we meditate, we feel nothing. It's a complete blank. We stop receiving signs. Our guides don't talk to us. It's a total blackout. And another symptom that's very common in the spiritual dark night of the soul is that we can feel very tired because we're not receiving our usual flow of energy. So we have very little desire to do anything at all. Some people have a purging period at the beginning of the spiritual dark night of the soul where they release a lot of pent-up trauma and emotion. So there can also be a lot of tears. And again, during this type of dark night of the soul, we also start thinking about what we want our life to look like because we've manifestly changed as a person. We are not the same person we were before we started the spiritual awakening journey. And also we should be reasonably sure of our purpose by now. And we started to outgrow some of the people around us. We're not prepared to tolerate certain types of behavior anymore. So all of this adds up to wanting to reshape our lives. And the spiritual dark night of the soul is a good time to start planning. You're not really up to much in terms of action, but it's a good time to just lie back and consider what's working for you and what isn't working for you and what your future could look like. Now, many people find the spiritual dark night of the soul literally unbearable, so they give up on their spiritual awakening journey altogether. They stop meditating and they give up their spiritual practice. And what happens in this instance is that they start to go backwards. They de-integrate from their higher selves. Now, the good news is this does result in you exiting from the dark night of the soul, so the symptoms disappear. But the bad news is the next time you take up your spiritual practice, you're just going to re-enter the dark night of the soul again when you hit 50% integration the next time around. So it's vastly preferable to try to push on through. It is a temporary stage of awakening. You can move beyond it. I've actually written a book on the subject. I'll link you to it. You can get through the dark night of the soul. And what lies on the other side is really magnificent. My top tip for people going through the spiritual dark night of the soul is you need to meditate every day for as long as you possibly can, hours and hours if you can manage it. And the reason for that is, even though you can't feel anything, you're continuing the integration via meditation. And why that's important is because as long as you haven't gone backwards, you're moving forwards, you're going to exit the spiritual dark night of the soul at around 65 to 70% integration. And what happens then is everything comes back online almost overnight with very little warning. You're connected again. But of course, it's very hard to keep going when there's no indication where you are in the integration journey. And unfortunately, at this point, you just need to trust the process and keep going. You see, once you're out the other side of the dark night of the soul, you're in the advanced learning stage and you're back to feeling super connected. You have all of your powers back. And actually from that point on is really when the magic starts to happen. If you want to know how to get through each type of dark night of the soul, I'll make a separate video on that with specific guidance for each type. So I'll link you to that video in the description. Meanwhile, if you are in a dark night of the soul, please take heart. The universe never gives us more than we can cope with, and you can and you will get through it. And not only that, what lies beyond it is better than you have ever imagined.